This is a radio broadcast addressed from the League of Nations on the global war effort against the Morgana threat, where we report the recent happenings amongst the major nations contributing to the defense of our united front. I am your speaker, Ammaraglio Maus, but you may refer to me as Commissar, or simply the Speaker, whichever you or your government prefers. It is currently week 3 of September, and the war continues on all fronts, where each nation is doing their part to curb the Morgana threat. However, some nations more so than others, as the war in Europe continues to escalate, diverting valuable resources from our united front. First up, news from the League itself. Following the latest meeting where members of the League of Nations convened to discuss where to focus their efforts, the members passed the war plan diversions hastily made by 2/3 majority. Perhaps the Secretary-General was grateful for an excuse to look away from growing Nazi aggression. Maybe it was the interest from the world's governments in a cooperative framework at sea that finally spurred this action. Whatever the reason, this week the League of Nations made its priorities clear. Organizing a worldwide common response to the Morgana threat was more urgent than settling the question of Poland, or, indeed, any terrestrial conflict. This meant considerable latitude could be afforded to the world's great powers, at a cost to those that stood in their shadows. Perhaps the world's governments aren't all on board yet, but the League did what it could, launching an international campaign of interviews, press statements, and impassioned speeches. As a result, Navy recruitment around the world soared, and people who live safe distances away from the land wars got to feel just a little bit better not thinking about them. But one thing to remember, dear listeners, out of sight and out of mind does not mean the Morgana threat is not lurking around the river bend. Following this announcement from the League of Nations comes news from Italy, who continues to make great strides as the top contributing nation in combating the Morgana threat. Captains from the Regia Marina decided to work together with their Mediterranean brothers, the French Marine Nationale, through the war plan Good French Neighbors. Through this, the Western Mediterranean Sea caught a break this week as the Marine Nationale followed the lead of the Regia Marina to great effect. At least, that's the story they're telling from Milan to Palermo, sources say. As a result of this joint effort, the Morgana attack on Toulon was routed, and the 2 European fleets combined to crush the surviving enemy before they could regroup and join a raid on Porto Torres. Mussolini's government rides high on the recent string of successes, with his reputation and prestige as a statesman and leader growing by the day. The coasts of Sardinia and Corsica are, if neither safe nor entirely peaceful, at least as secure as anywhere else in the Mediterranean. One would rather sail a fishing boat from Porto Torres than from anywhere in the Balearic Sea. The League of Nations strongly approved of this show of cooperation, and their diplomatic outreach has been pleasantly humble. Perhaps the time will come when the Eagles may return to Geneva. However, there may ultimately be complications rising from reminding Italian sailors that the French are their brothers and sisters. If the 2 nations ever stand at odds, it could make firing the first shot that much harder. But surely there would be no reason for war at this time or any foreseeable near-term future. Perhaps a more immediate threat is that the Morgana vanity begins to perceive the Regia Marina as an opponent deserving of her special attention. Needless to say, captains of the Regia Marina should be extra diligent moving forward. Following that comes news from the other side of the Atlantic with the United States, who, through much effort, had found themselves as the second leading nation against the Morgana threat, surpassing both France and the United Kingdom in a single week. Quite an impressive feat, to say the least. Locally, the powers that be within the United States government, particularly the Senate and the House of Representatives, were quite divided on what approach to take regarding the nation, with some disgruntled senators even referring to representatives as, quote, the silent majority. However, with much deliberation, an overall 56% voted in favor of enacting war plan joining hands. The United States of America was coming to embrace its belles as celebrities, as friendly sisters, and as symbols of a decent kind of life. And when the belles joined Franklin Delano Roosevelt in saying that Morganas had to be fought everywhere for the preservation of all humanity, well, it appealed to a lot of people. Even some die-hard isolationists joined the cause, seeing in this naval campaign an alternative to an ugly land war in Europe. The battles ongoing on 2 oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific, provided early insight into the strength of pre-war training, and is in the process of being studied at the Naval War College. And, if anything, the belles fought harder than ever to gain that knowledge. The Rockefeller Foundation promoted a League of Nations speech tour, with the result that the League itself enjoyed a degree of support it hadn't experienced for many years inside the United States. However, it wasn't lost on Germany, though, that the president seemed to take this new development in naval insight as an excuse to provide more support to Britain and France. The fact that an American Navy was gaining the power and prestige necessary to project its power into Europe has made the United States into possibly a more urgent threat than before in the eyes of Germany. After that comes news from France, the third contributing member to the Morgana war effort. Following their operations in the northeastern Atlantic, members of the French government convened and voted 76% in favor of and passed the war plan Good Italian Neighbors, subsequently cooperating with Italy's Regia Marina with operations in the Mediterranean. Delanier's government may still have worries over Mussolini's lust for Tunisia, but this week the Marine Nationale joined hands with the Regia Marina to great effect. A Morgana attack on Toulon was routed, and the two European fleets combined to crush the surviving enemy before they could regroup and join a raid on Porto Torres. If there can be said to be a downside, it is that the Marine Nationale was likely seen to be the junior partner in this fragile rapprochement. Yes, they gained combat experience, but they did it by watching the Regia Marina display what it had learned in the Red Sea firsthand. Even within the Marine Nationale, doubts were beginning to grow if the two sides were ever to come into direct opposition. Would France be at a disadvantage? In the Atlantic, however, matters became grave for the French, as the Germans seemed to have used their strength in the North Sea and the general chaos of a Morgana attack on the Channel to sneak raiders southward. Allied tonnage losses in the Bay of Biscay weren't significant, but were a rude reminder of the German submarine strength and their willingness to use it. Overall, French relations with Italy are now stronger than they've been since the aftermath of the Munich Agreement, and the French Mediterranean coast is safer. The British in particular were pleased to see growing amity given the general situation of the war, and in all that, the Morgana mischief seemed to sense an opportunity to have some fun. Some of my sources say a French captain had one thing to say in regards to the Morgana mischief: plan around and find out. And now for a hop across the Channel to hear the report from the United Kingdom, the fourth contributing member to the United Front against the Morgana. Following the influx of trade from Canada, the United Kingdom find themselves economically strengthened with their Atlantic trade routes secured. However, with recent events, the British Parliament was split on their course of action and for their latest proposal, with said proposal barely making it through both houses with 53% support. The Prime Minister, with the approval of His Majesty, later announced the enactment war plan forced to evolve as a response to recent convoy raiding by the German Kriegsmarine. British screening fleets in the southwestern approaches were particularly effective in driving off the expected but unfortunate threat of German U-boats. Their skill will be needed by their allies for times to come. However, the Germans found fruitful hunting grounds in the Bay of Biscay, minorly disrupting trade and supply in the region. Generally, the prestige of the United Kingdom was on the up, as conditions around the home isles and the Empire improved. The home fleet, sailing from their impregnable fortress harbor of Scapa Flow, defended successfully against an uncharacteristically determined set of Morgana fleets. Their attempts to travel south at all costs to the Channel was thwarted at all turns. It is still unknown why the Morganas sought to force the Channel, or what they could have gained from such a brazen attack. Whispers have also begun to spread that the Morgana corruption has begun a radio program of her own, as if Lord Ha-Ha were not bad enough. Lastly, and of minor note, was that HMS King Alfred, open for the training of reserve officers from the 11th, closed its doors this week. It will continue to be used as a Royal Navy facility, but evidently the quality of its accommodations was not sufficient for its intended purpose. Now we move over to the Pacific with the Empire of Japan, the fifth-ranking nation for the Morgana war effort. The Imperial Japanese Navy, finding 60% support within its own ranks, agreed to move forward with the proposal for war plan towards cooperation, in the hopes of continuing to build upon the framework laid down last week. However, word of these discussions began to spread to public channels. It was an unattributed comment in the Tokyo Asahi Shimbun, but it exploded across Japanese politics. An anonymous naval officer hinted at a radical conclusion, that the bells of other nations were indeed kami in their own right, and that if they argued that humanity needed to make a common effort against the Funayori, it couldn't simply be dismissed out of hand. The League of Nations was thrilled, and the Japanese belles were almost united in approval of the statement. But the Imperial Japanese Army, and indeed the bulk of the Japanese government, scandalized may be too small of a word. This was a question for the Emperor, and no other. Was the Imperial Japanese Navy burning too many bridges? Would this indelicate splinter be the start of a new period of government by assassination? Perhaps those in both branches should keep an eye on their easily influenced junior officers just to be safe. Needless to say, the growing amount of dysfunction between the two factions is worrying when a far scarier threat lurks out on the ocean. Following that, we return to Europe with news from Germany, the sixth-ranking contributor to the war effort against the Morgana. Following their successes in the North and Baltic Seas, new orders came from top officials in Berlin to begin intensifying efforts against the United Kingdom and more particularly France through a war-planned French season. Reportedly, 80% of the Kriegsmarine were in support of executing this plan. After weeks of generously protecting their neighbors from the Morgana threat, the Kriegsmarine took an opportunistic opening and reminded the French Marine Nationale that the safety of the Bay of Biscay was something of an illusion. U-boats like certain Morgana could come and go as they pleased, and a major attack on the approaches to the channel provided exactly the ability to do just that. While not in convoys, many merchants were still protected, but enough were not to bring laurels to several captains. The French weren't thrilled at the reminder. The Germans were showing a frightening power in Poland, and their secret alliance with the Soviet Union made them only stronger. U-boats in the bay were another indicator that the reach of Germany was long and still impactful. Sources say that certain French belles were impressed, even if they would prefer not to be. The League of Nations, working hard to form the International Naval Protection Force on the model of the Spanish Civil War, took a dim view of this use of sea power. Clearly, Germany was not yet ready to rejoin the Covenant. A disappointing turn of events, to say the least. Lastly, we turn our attention to our comrades in Eastern Europe with the seventh contributing nation to the war against the Morgana, the Soviet Union. On September 18th, the Soviet invasion of Poland began, beginning what appears to be the final disintegration of Polish resistance in the country. British guarantees seem not to include for this possibility, leaving the Allies still neutral in regards to the Union. With their limited resources and expanding war, the Soviets found themselves with few allies besides Germany. Orders came from Moscow to enact War Plan Turkish Delight, which found 83% support from the Politburo. Soviet captains were expected to support anti-Morgana surface actions in the Black Sea alongside any remaining Turkish vessels. Moreover, the Soviets couldn't afford to have the Black Sea fleet sealed away behind a wall of Morgana, and they couldn't tolerate the ongoing erosion of their defenses in Odessa and Sevastopol. They made common cause with the Turks, who had been pleading for more aggressive assistance for weeks and won themselves room to breathe in the south, to some extent at least. Though troubling rumors came from the wetlands of the Danube Delta, the Morgana disease was reportedly seen dragging a hulk into the muds and waters for some unknown purpose. Does she plan on rebuilding her forces with the resources found further inland in the Kingdom of Romania? Or does she want to strike back by contaminating the river which stems far into the Balkans? Only time will tell the answers. Elsewhere, the Soviets trusted that the coming winter would be all the shield they needed in the Arctic. Comrade Winter surely was also an admiral for their cause. These predictions did not seem to lessen Morgana activity in the region, however, as they continued to run amok amongst convoys in the far north. And that concludes the League of Nations War Report for Week 3 of September. We encourage all of the nations to continue working together in order to tackle the Morgana threat. And as a reminder to all captains and citizens alike that this radio broadcast is intended on keeping you informed about the unified war effort against the Morgana. But there is more you can do than just listen. Donate some much-needed war bonds to help our boys and girls on the ocean stay afloat so they can finish the job. Doing so will net you prestige among your peers that you captains can utilize to gain more resources, dock and harbor space, and personnel for your own war efforts so that you too can continue fighting the good fight in your own way. Thank you for listening, and may you have smooth seas.